All right, welcome everybody. Welcome to another night of Communities Read. Tonight we're reading comics with Walker Mettling. Unfortunately, our co-hosts, my co-hosts, Amy, Rosa, and Nate Ramos won't be here tonight. But what do I see here? Request transcription. Yes, transcription is on. But no, Nate's Walker's here, and I can help facilitate. So let's see. So yeah, Walker, I mean, you've he wrote this wonderful book that we were reading. So if you haven't read it already, oops, it's a bit
It's
blurred.
sensitive.
It's blurred because of my background. But if you haven't read it yet, go get it. It's a lot of fun. It's a lot of fun to read. It doesn't take long, I don't know, less than a half hour easily, right? To finish, I would say. And it's, like I said, it's a lot of fun, very colorful. It's called COVID Winter Desert Diary. We have a few copies in our system. So yeah, I'm gonna let Walker kind of take it away, talk about the book, when really whatever you'd like to talk about. And then we'll have a conversation about it, and can go from there. So yeah, take it away, Walker.
All right, thanks, Lee. Everybody, round of applause for the this the I can't the PLC the I can't get the new acronym, or I guess that's the Providence Community Libraries of Providence. Thanks. If you're unfamiliar with me, my name's Walker Mettling. I'll just show you a handful of things, and then I'm gonna share screen, and I'll do a little bit of reading and show you chunks of this book. And yeah, I clocked myself reading it yesterday. This is the first time I read it in a little while, and I don't think it was the whole. It was at least 23 minutes, which it took a lot longer than 23 minutes to make, which is kind of crazy. Some other stuff that I do. I am a printmaker, and so this is like a print of a building on the east side that I stayed in that had a snake in the freezer when I lived there. This is out in the desert near my parents' house where the book is takes place, and they have like an abominable snowman creature out in the desert called Yucca Man. So those are kind of printy things that I do. I've taught comics at the community libraries since 2010. Haven't had too much programming in the last little while, but September 21st and September 22nd at Washington Park and Knight Memorial, gonna do some horror animations with kids. I have a comic strip in Motif magazine. I on and off documenting Robert the Hermit, who was a man who lived in a cave in the 19th century in what's now East Providence. I do an anthology called The Wipeout, where sometimes I get to hire kids from comics class to make new work. I'm just finishing up making some new body part swapping trading cards. I don't know. There's a bunch of stuff. Sketchbook Church on Sundays, and then I think some other days I do free community group sketchbook games for an hour. But I'm gonna share screen and talk about COVID Winter Desert Diary. All right. Give me 1 second. I got it on the. My my studio is right on the highway, so I've shut my windows. So I might sweat throughout this. So you might be able to see me become more glistening throughout. So, this is a book that I worked on last year. It was it's about my trip out to see my parents, the first time that travel was really possible. At the beginning of 2021, and they live out in the desert in California. I'll just read you a couple little chunks. I'll flip past some things and talk about things, and then I'll show you some behind the scenes stuff of how I made it. So that was, yeah. So that's actually the wood grain from the entrance sign of the Yucca Valley post office. Snag to that. All right. It's mid-2021 now, and our memory of 2020 is rapidly blurring out. I can feel it in myself. I'm vaccinated. Both my parents are, too. The majority of people in the store now aren't wearing masks. Trump is still banging his fascist drum, but we don't hear it constantly, and hardly anyone wears masks outdoors now. But at the very beginning of 2021, there wasn't a widespread vaccine. People were still getting sick and passing away. Trump was still president and venomously lying about the election and daring his militia acolytes and soggy-headed QAnons into a coup d'etat. January 6, 2021, I flew to California from Rhode Island to visit my parents for 2 months. That turned out to be the same day Trump encouraged an assortment of QAnon goobers, militia klansmen, evangelical grandmas, and Proud Boy brown shirts to trash the Capitol so Biden wouldn't be signed in as the next president. I started laughing just thinking about the lady grabbing her kid. What did I say? What did I say? It was just normal airport, only silent CNN. I was watching the silent CNN TVs playing above the cranky babies and inattentive Bostonians, but my boarding group got called and I had to get on the plane. I read and half slept and looked out the window like a normal flight, but I had a panic tingle. What if a QAnoner gets killed by the cops? Does Trump institute martial law? And then what? Denver, my layover, was a hot spot for a COVID variant at the time. So I drank my Gatorade in a corner with the recycling bins. Nobody has their masks over their noses. I flew the rest of the way on a quarter-full plane. My parents met me at the airport and from a distance passed me car keys as I drove alone. I was fiddling with the radio, trying to pick up the news, but I just ended up on the wrong freeway. I pulled off and parked in front of a laundromat, digging out the GPS to find my way in the dark to my parents' house in the desert. At that point, I didn't have a smartphone. And so I'm gonna skip past some of these strips. There's the desert, and but the way that I built this thing was right here. These are single pages as I'm flipping through. But in the actual book and the way that the architecture of the book worked in my mind as I was making it, I was laying it out as these big 2-page spreads. And initially I was trying to make the book for the book and zine fair, the RISD Unbound, which was in April, I think. And I offered it, but only a few of them sold. So I just went back in and I was like, oh, okay, I want to fill this out. At the time I was reading like some of the 1930s Mickey Mouse comic strips that are all 4 panels. So I used the big 2-page spreads as the scaffolding. and then just filled in everything else from my diary that I had, that I'd been keeping. So anyways, so I'm gonna flip through some of these, and I'm gonna read another couple chunks. So quarantine. So I was staying out in the garage for a week. Bottom left is my mom, Donna. Next to her is my dad, Rich. I always called them by their first names. Yoda is their COVID dog, a boxer with a smashed in face. While I was distancing from them, I just hung out in this tent found in the garage, and I'd sit up in the garage window and have coffee with my mom. And sometimes she'd sit outside and I'd sit next to the window, and we'd talk for like 5 hours. Just getting tested. Took about 7 days, then got a positive test, or not a positive test, a negative test, and then got to hang out with them. My grandma used to raise poodles, and she pinched off the tails, is that last one. It snowed while I was there. There was roadrunners. All right. Hiking in the desert. My Saturday morning ritual. I'd get up at 6 a.m., pack water and snacks, and walk to the desert. My dad and Yoda would often walk with me to the edge. They'd peel off, and I'd keep walking on the dirt road till I'd get to the land trust. And I'd walk on trails and old washes and long ridges till I'd come down out of the mountains above Joshua Tree. Rich would drive into Joshua Tree to go to the farmer's market and the bakery and grab some takeout from the country kitchen, and he'd pick me up on his way home. There's my flip phone. It's about 10 miles, and it takes about 4 hours to hike. This morning, it was 8 a.m. before I got some sunshine, and all the tops of the rocks were glittery with ice. Climbing up the wash, I listened to on the media, and Brooke made 65 grand on the GameStop Reddit Wall Street hack. Going up over the top, I listened to a 1973 Gene Shepard radio show about crime, and he had a few NYPD detectives call in, and they actually sounded pretty enlightened. And after Gene Shepard was done with the cops, I unplugged my headphones and started climbing down. Huge rocks, some treacherous with frost, and I would game out some of my roots because to break a leg up here would be a nightmare. A Clark Ashton Smith audio book report. Once I made it through the icy gauntlet, I wanted to treat myself for surviving, so I played an audio version of the Clark Ashton Smith story, Empire of Necromancers. Basically, it's a couple of necromancers who get kicked out of a city after trying to dig up bodies and reanimate them, and the people are like, "You're not doing that here." And so they end up stumbling upon a completely dead city that a plague has ripped through a long time ago. And they started opening up the tombs and animating the royals and every other dead human body that they can find. So they live in the lap of luxury, lounging on imperial couches, getting drunk on wine they must have found, waited on by liches and skeletons. But there's some cognitive spark in one of the necromanced kings, and he starts struggling with some of the serious cognitive dissonance of being a big dog royalty, but then being magically forced into feeding grapes to these schlubs. And so the zombie king starts plotting. I love the schlubby necromancer telling him that's enough wine. So our protagonist, necromanced king, goes and talks to an ancient mummy who's hardly moving, just sorting potatoes or something. And he asks him if he is his magical great-great-great-great-grandpa that there were legends about. And the mummy's like, "Yeah, but I can't hardly remember anything." And at the same time, the necromancers are gearing up to force all these zombies to wage a guerrilla war on the first city that had kicked them out. But our king cuts off the necromancer's head before any of that can happen. Then all of the undead servants, other than the necromanced king and the magic grandpa, throw themselves into a lava river below the fortress, returning to their deathly sleep and destroying their bodies so they'll be utterly unnecromanceable. And the magic grandpa uses a necromancy spell on the dead and hacked apart necromancers' bodies. Then they lock the throne room door and wade like family into the lava themselves, leaving the necromancer's body parts to scramble back and forth in the lavish court with nothing to even do forever. The end. 2 thumbs up. Spoiler warning. Should have said that at the beginning. All right, I'm gonna read these 4 strips. These 4 panel strips. Yulorn. There was another Clark Ashton Smith story that I listened to, Colossus of Yulorn, that scratched at a theme I think of often. If you have a Frankenstein monster, a multi-person collaged together necromanced body, what happens to the ghosts attached to the borrowed body parts? I won't spoil this story except to say that it supersizes the premise. The paper. What are you reading about? I asked my mother. Oh, there was a lady who went missing 6 months ago. They found her car in the desert but haven't found her, and they think she just went hiking and got lost. Hiking alone. My father says, you know, it makes me pretty nervous, you hiking alone. Okay, I say. I'll be super careful. My mother shares a remembrance of getting blown around in a persimmon tree after hanging out in a hammock that I had. This one is I'm just going to talk about a few as we go past them. Yeah, this one was this was at that point where it was really jarring to see somebody without a mask, kind of surprising. And there was a guy who was looking really ill and really not well in the Stater Brothers grocery store. And yeah, so I was trying to, these streaks coming out of me and the streaks that were coming out of me on the airplane, those are spidey sense if nobody else picked that up. But yeah, I don't know. I was just locking this in and locking in my reactions on this. And like, unfortunately, I think that Stater Brothers grocery store actually went through a number of managers that actually passed away. I think it was a rough place to hold it down. And so this one was about taking my dad to go get his first shot, and it was at the Fontana Speedway. It got on the news because we would have been there all night if we had waited in line. He walked up to the front and hitchhiked in, and then we masked up because he hung out in a lady's car for an hour as they were getting vaccinated. All right, and then I'll read this one, and then I'm going to show you some behind the scenes stuff. My favorite thing about the desert is the morning golden hour, when everything that's brown and tan and greenish brown turns fluorescent orange. The purple shadows stretch out and show where the passes through the mountains are. My phone is full of photos of the desert sunrise, and they're all lousy pictures. Somehow the landscapes are still just brown. It's the shift that's the amazing part anyways. From the dark to glowing to normal, like a time lapse of a flower growing or the transition of a man into a werewolf. And yeah, so this was like on the back. I have right here, I don't know how tiny, but yeah, I'm holding right here my like stack of pages from making this book. And so I kind of just went through and scanned some of a few little interesting bits. This was just on the back of one of the pages when I was kind of like, I don't know, working out, trying to figure out how I was going to draw my dad, how I was going to draw the dog throughout. And I really didn't. I think for my brain, I'm pretty ADD, and I think everybody's pretty bad in terms of holding on to memories and remembering stuff. So I think that was my main priority, was locking it down. I don't think, like I said earlier about making the spreads, I think in terms of making the spreads, I think that freed me up to not necessarily worry about necessarily having like a cohesive way that everything looks. So anyways, these were early tests of how I drew my dad, or how I was going to draw my dad. And then I went through today and I clipped out every like instance of my mom. And I think it's weird because I've known my mom a long time. And so inside of my head, I think I hold all the different parts. Like when I think about her, I think about, sometimes I'm seeing the version of her from when I was in middle school or something. But anyways, regardless, this is just another point. This is another data point in me not being too worried about having keeping the aesthetic exactly the same as I went through. The one in the circle from when she's like swinging in the tree as a kid, I was looking at a photo for that one. All right, so I just wanted to show you what kind of like, this is the page, how it basically looks in the book, and that's like what the original looks like. And so yeah, like it's got kind of a QAnon thing. It has a hot yoga lady, not an attractive yoga lady, but a hot temperature yoga lady who's got kind of like spirally eyes, but yeah, so I chose not to use that, but it was just funny. Also down in the bottom, you can kind of see there's a paste up where I didn't like how my mom's head looked. So I pasted down a new head. Yeah, and so these were just kind of my quick, I had these little slips of paper after I decided I was going to buff it up with like the 4-panel strips. And I walked around, or I just did my normal life. I wasn't necessarily walking around, but in my possession, I had these little slips, and I would just do 4 panels, and I had a checklist. But I don't know. When I was going through stuff today, I totally forgot that I did this. So I was like, oh, that's kind of cool to see those next to each other. That was the original. I was like, oh, that's too much. But that was originally what that one was going to be. And I just redrew it from the guy in the Stater Brothers. But I was like, oh, I'm sure I could, it would be odd. It'd be odd, but I think I could get a heavy metal band to get on board to have that as a t-shirt, perhaps. Oh yeah, so like on our way back after he got the vaccine, we stopped at the Cabazon dinosaurs that are in the Pee Wee Herman movie. I just made my dad get out and do the Tyrannosaurus Rex pose. Yeah, so this was like my checklist at the end. This was like my internal table of contents in terms of, I think the asterisks meant that that the lines were done, and if it was a 2-color page, I think it had a a box next to it that got crossed off. Yeah. More. I think that's kind of the last pages, just kind of laying out, getting bored with the 4-panel format and just making triangles and weird shapes. And that's the original drawing for what I ended up using for the cover. And that's, I don't know, that's what I put together to share. So I'm down to just talk about it, or if anybody has any questions or
Yeah,
whatever.
sounds good. That is so interesting. Let me just remove, there we go. I love how you showed us the process. You know, when I first read it, oh, well, before I jump in with my comments, please, let me make sure you can unmute. Let's see. Yeah, so you can, everyone can unmute themselves. So what we'll do is, you know, if you want to post a question or put your hand up, anyway, just to let me know that I can call on you and you're, or just, you know, unmute, you're welcome to. But I could get things started, I suppose. When I first read it, I guess my first impression was just the color. The color. I love the color. And you mentioned the 2-page spreads, right? And every time there was a new 2-page spread, there was just a new color, I guess, right? And it was typically monochromatic, but not always. The layout might switch a little bit, but I was always, you know, kind of excited to see like, oh, what's the new coloration going to be, you know?
Yeah.
Because it's really it's just such fascinating tones. So I was wondering if you could describe, like, I know you've already described the process in detail, but like you mentioned that you did experiment with color and that kind of took you some additional time after. Could you just describe like how you went about with the coming up with these colors?
Yeah, definitely. And I think I was the PDF that I was using to share was, I made it for I made it for something where I needed to send in a digital version as well as a physical copy. So I was sort of reckless in terms of putting it together color wise. Like, just in terms of like, so the covers are screen printed, and like, I'm here, this is the way to do it. But so like I was using like fluorescent pink to like mess with it, but where I kind of used red in the end, in terms of doing the colors and kind of like putting stuff together. In terms of the insides, like, as I was like, if I was putting a page, each book project's a little bit of an experiment, I think, in terms of keeping myself interested in what I'm doing. That often means that I end up doing it probably the hardest way to do it. So this being laid out horizontally, I am laying out the pages once they're done in InDesign, which doesn't super well translate. My words are coming out in a funny order. But anyways, so I'm printing these two up. I'm printing these 2 pages at the same time, cutting them, which led to a lot of weird choices. So in terms of laying out these colors, so this is like it's a very light medium blue and black. And so when I was adding the second color to this, I had no idea what color this was actually going to be. All I knew was that I was going to do a halftone layer that was going to be a second color. And then in the printing process, so I printed everything on the risographs, which is like, if you're not familiar, it's technologically in between it looks like a modern copier, but it's closer to a mimeograph. It has a color cylinder that you can swap out the different colors inside of. And so anything that has more than one color has gone through the machine twice. But yeah, I think in terms of there's a couple that have fluorescent orange, and I think that those are the most. There's one about a hole in a rock, and then there's the sunset or the sunrise sunset one, where those were super considered. Yeah, so like, and I don't know how well they show up on the screen, but that hot orange is super hot. But yeah, I'm not totally answering your question except to say, did it initially? I'm not considering what colors I'm gonna do, but once I'm working on it, I'm like, oh yeah, I'm gonna do gray and burgundy, and just try out new colors that I haven't done before. So like that one makes sense in terms of that's about like the spots on my mom's window where the hawks have run doves into the house, turning the windows into like executing doves via a window. And just I was like, okay, well, gray is a nice color for the glass or whatever. But yeah, and then the inside color covers are all rainbow rolls, so everybody kind of got different colors of those. I was just tossing all the different colors in when I was printing the inside covers.
Mhm, cool. Yeah, and even like the colors of the desert when there's that one that 2 page of the desert, and
Yeah.
it's like, and you mentioned, I think, in there that you're trying to take photographs and it just wouldn't, you couldn't capture it. It looked dull, I think, more. That's
Yeah.
kind of what I took the impression of. But then when your coloration is just so awesome. I don't know, it was just I feel like you did capture it with your colors there.
I appreciate that.
With your comics. Yeah. So yeah, does anyone else have any questions? You're welcome to unmute. Any questions, comments? Love to, invite you to join in. Cheryl.
Hey, Walker. So
Hey.
I just want to say I appreciate that you took the time to, you always do, but that you took the time to be creative and create this as like a memory, because as you were reading it, it brought me right back into moments where I felt the same, like the dread of somebody coughing, like anywhere near in a place where I was, or just looking around at, masks and all of these things. So I just appreciate that you brought us back. And I know for me, I was almost like frozen into doing nothing except staring at a television or just reading endless articles about what was going on and not able to be creative at all. So was that hard for you as a creative person, or did you find it not? I'm rambling around a little bit here, but I guess I want to say, I think myself and other people I talked to really shut down creatively and just were like caught up in the news cycle, caught up in the fear, caught up in every detail, but you still managed to be creative and to create this sort of response. And how was that for you? I guess that's what I'm trying to ask.
Thanks, Cheryl. I appreciate the gist of that idea. It is that weird thing where like 2020, 2021, this is like, I was like, oh, I think at the moment, okay, I'm going to answer I'm going to cross my fingers. I'm going to answer your question. And then I have another thought too. Yeah, I don't know. I think I'm always, sometimes me just being in a hole working on a thing and having actual less distraction is actually, it was at the same time a lot more distraction and a lot less distraction right at the beginning, like 2020. And I think I did do some things during that time. In terms of this one, in terms of doing something creative in 2021, I think I had been in the house. I'd been like, I wasn't, at that point, we weren't running outside because we were worried about, like, some people were giving side eye to people who were jogging, but they were, and so, yeah, like, yeah, I wasn't running outside. I was walking quite a bit, but I wasn't, I don't know. And through a bunch of other projects that I do normally, like I do read, like right at the beginning of the pandemic, I dug into uh, like Projo articles from 1918 and was kind of digging around about what the responses were at that point and how people were thinking about it then. And so in some ways that is what kind of like locked it in as something that I wanted to do. I just I think we're all completely gaslit by the movement of time, like our own understanding of it, like our brains just automatically calcify into the next group understanding of what the thing is and what's happening. And I think I felt like in early 2021 where stuff was getting weird and like in terms of like militant anti-vaxxing and not militant vaxxing, and just being like, oh, this is weird. This is when this gets frozen in time, we're gonna forget like when it was really confusing and you couldn't put your finger on anything. And I think I just wanted, just for my own self, and in terms of thinking about looking at things that were written 100 years ago, I was like, oh, I really appreciate it when you're looking at a snapshot where it's not somebody writing about a phenomenon that happened 20 years before, but it's actually somebody who's writing about something and they don't know what's happening, and they're kind of stupid in that way that we're all stupid in the flow of the actual moment, and you're going to be wrong about some things, and you're just, I don't know. But I don't know. I kind of word saladed that a little bit, but I think it feels right.
Yep, thank you.
Yeah, thanks, Walker. Does anyone else have any other questions or comments? You're welcome to unmute Margaret. You're unmuted. You're still muted, I'm afraid, Margaret. Let me you should be able. There you go.
Yeah, thank you for doing this. It's very interesting to see the process. So I'm curious as what you're working on now, and how you decide what new project to begin on, or do you just kind of make notes every day and then kind of figure out like what you're going to expand?
Oh my gosh. Well, okay. So I'm not sure how many years I've done. What I'm trying to do right now is lock in the 2023 calendar. Every year I do a calendar with my bud Caitlin Callie, and so that's the immediate next thing we're gonna do, and we worked out a really weird process of how we did the calendar last year. We kind of do a different thing every year. We're kind of, but so this is like a creature that she did, and so we'll have a bunch of creatures. I did like an awful creature. I'm gonna have kind of more normal creatures as well. But so our process for this calendar, similar to the last one, is like, so she's gonna give me her drawing of this cute, whatever kind of semi-canine-ish creature, and I'm gonna cover it in post-it notes, cover certain parts of it in post-it notes, and mutate the drawing, and we'll pass it back and forth. And so like it'll get mutated over 4 months or something. So that's not exactly a narrative project. In terms of narrative projects, I'm working on a little anthology. I don't know if it's actually going to be the anthology that I do is called The Wipeout. I don't know if it's going to end up being an issue of The Wipeout or not, but it's a Western theme. So playing with like kind of Western genres, and I'm doing like a longer comic in that, and then I'm gonna toss scripts and premises to other artists but it'll all be kind of Western or sort of like Western adjacent. And yeah, I mentioned it earlier, but I'm slowly working on an adaptation of the 1830s pamphlet about the Robert the Hermit, which when I started, I think I jumped into it because I needed, I was kind of under like the strip deadline for Motif magazine, and I was like, oh yeah, Robert the Hermit. I would love to like adapt a 19th century pamphlet because they're old zines and they're just interesting. And when I started, I think I forgot that it was actually also a slave narrative. So it's this heavier thing where I kind of take breaks. It like takes 2 or 3 times the normal amount of time to do one of those because I don't want to mess it up. And yeah, so I don't know, and that might maybe stretch that out into a longer thing at some point. But I do the lists. It's kind of whatever I can lock my attention into for a long enough time that it actually gets done, I think.
So earlier Gina had entered something in the chat when you were you showed us that picture of I think it was a graphic. You thought it would make a cool metal t-shirt.
Oh, sure.
There is the band called Cough, if you weren't aware, that may be interested in buying that drawing.
I'll be in touch with them immediately.
Okay, great. Okay, cool. And then Jeremy is in a public space, so I'm going to read their question. Thinking more about time and creativity being weird, how much were you documenting, writing, sketching the days as you were living them versus recollecting, editing, refining afterward?
Okay, so definitely wasn't too worried about refining. And like at the end, it actually took a while. Okay, so I'll answer that question, and then I'm going to pull out something that'll be a visual note to go back to. I think in terms of doing the spreads, I think I did like that Stater Brothers, the guy walking around without a mask, but me kind of drawing him like a zombie. I think I did that day. So like, I think in terms of the big spreads, like a lot of those were happening while I was out in California. I was out in California January and February of 2021. And I think most of the thing was drawn. All those big spreads were drawn like in February and March. And then but in terms of polish, I wasn't doing too much polishing. But that made me think of like I had a reviews section that I was planning on doing that was gonna have a review of Rerun Era, the autobiographical novel by Joanna Howard, the documentary Feels Good Man about Pepe the Frog, an issue of King Cat, Backdurf's Kent State. So like I was gonna have like a review section in the back, and then it was like, I think at a certain point it was like have to go. Like just at that point things like that kind of got edited. Here's I'll just show it to you. I'm not gonna read it, but here's a strip that was like about having I have it's since I was like a teenager and I got poison ivy on the palm of my hand. I have like one really dry hand. It's not really dry right now, but out in the desert it gets really dry. And so this mummy hand comic was a comic I cut, but it kind of turned into kind of like the werewolf changing thing I kind of made it in, I had a glove at a certain point that I was putting moisturizer into, and was just imagining a like kind of a mothy looking monster creature coming out of my my moistened gloved hand. Was that the question that Jeremy asked? He asked a question about my moistened gloved hand. Is that right?
I'm not sure. I'm not sure they mentioned that precisely, but. Oh wait! Oh no! Jeremy approves. Jeremy approves. Yes, more moisturizing content, please.
Yeah. No, actually, that's the. We're actually going to start a second Zoom at 7:30. That's
Okay.
going to be a 4-hour program. No,
All right,
JK.
cool. But yeah. So, would anyone else like to unmute and share your thoughts?
There hasn't been too much, no one's chimed in accusing me of lying, or there hasn't been any public, I was ready for some takedowns, but,
No, I feel like this is no. I think this is a pretty. I think it's very clear. It's authentic. Like I could. No, I could. No, really. It really captures your anxiety, and I think it's the shared anxiety, right? It's that peak anxiety. I could feel it. It's so funny because it's so recent, but I forgot what that felt like, and so it kind of brought me back, and also like the social etiquette, because I feel like I got the sense that you knew you were doing your due diligence, right? But at the same time, like then you had folks that you'd encounter that would be unmasked, but then at the same time you'd meet other folks that say were even more stringent. I think there was one maybe 4-panel segment in which you went to Robo-Land or Robo-Lights or
Robo
something,
Lights.
and you
Yeah.
had to leave because you weren't gloved.
Oh, and that was good. I mean, Kenny Irwin is the proprietor of Robo Lights, and all love to Kenny Irwin. Assalamu alaikum to Kenny Irwin. But it was one of those things where, it's like, I mean, I think that in particular, because, I think I'm interested in etiquette anyways, normal etiquette, and that was one of the crazy things about the pandemic, is that there were competing etiquettes, and there's still competing etiquettes. Like when I go, like Lord willing, I don't have to go very soon, but when I go to my mechanic, I don't wear my mask to my mechanic because I don't know how many extra $100 that adds onto my bill. But yeah, Kenny Irwin, I think it is fair to say, like, he's neurodivergent, and he had very specific rules, and we just had an issue with communication, and it was like, no, you gotta have, and he's showing up in his respirator, shirtless, in his like rubber gloves. And you're like, oh, you never sent us an email about any rubber gloves, man. But we just got to get out of there. Yeah. So, and that, I don't think I really thought about that, but that whole section going down to Palm Springs. So my parents live up in Yucca Valley, which it's not that trashy of a place. But then you go to Palm Springs, which is really kind of richy. And it was a barrage of etiquette misunderstandings. It was etiquette lessons for us that we unsolicited etiquette lessons about how to bag your dog's defecation, like how to not show up at the like weird art installation at this crazy mansion, how not to show up to the reservation owned like natural beauty hiking spot. And it was like, oh yeah, no, it was time to get hammered for etiquette for sure.
Mm-hmm.
Hey, Walker.
Oh,
yes.
yes, Rosalind.
I had a question. I was curious how I was curious about the Gene Shepherd
Yeah.
show and how you were listening to that.
Okay, great question.
Is it like a yeah.
What's your guess? You're allowed to guess.
Sure. My guess is like an archive of old radio broadcasts. That's my guess.
I think there's a handful, and I think from late November to probably late January, I go through my like Gene Shepherd period every year, and like kind of old time radio kind of lock that. My brain just shifts to that maybe. I think there's a couple different Gene Shepherd heads who do podcasts. And so they'll, some of them are just like old backlog podcasts, so you can just look up Gene Shepherd or whatever. Some people keep them up where they're like, they release them on the date that they got, where they were on the radio in 1972 or whatever. The people who really do their like due diligence, but I don't know. But yeah, no. So I think that was a premium, not that it cost money, but that someone was insane enough to put in too much time working on their Gene Shepherd podcast. I'm sure Lee's gonna look it up and put all the Gene Shepherd links in the. Just kidding. I'm kidding, Lee.
I'll send a follow-up email. all the Gene Shepherd links for you.
No.
I have a random quick question. Do you recommend Colossus? Because I'm so glad you didn't spoil that one, but you also mentioned it because I wasn't aware of it. But I love that question, and I'm wondering like what the answer to that question you posed is. So should I check out Colossus now and read it?
Yeah. Yes,
Okay.
you should. And it's not long. Are you a fan of Clark Ashton Smith?
Honestly, I'd never heard of Clark Ashton Smith until I read your comic book. So
I really like him.
Yeah.
He's a writer for Weird Tales at the same time as Lovecraft, but he's from California, and kind of like Cormac McCarthy, he kind of has a weird diction. Like he looks up old archaic words and he makes up new real sounding archaic words. But yeah, Clark Ashton Smith is awesome. He lived longer than a lot of the other Weird Tales authors. So I think he held on to his copyright, which actually made like knowledge of his work more obscure. I think the other people who died in the 30s, 40s, 50s, it went into the public domain or whatever, or other people just grabbed it and added onto their fragments, and then everybody knows who Conan is and all that stuff. But I think because he lived too long and had too much control of his work, it cost him a little bit of a legacy.
Interesting. Yeah, let's check it out. Yeah, so it's clearly a slice in time, right? But I feel like the topics can just run the gamut within that time. So it could be anything, which is part of the excitement, I guess, of the work, which I never knew what you were going to talk about next, whether it was, summarizing a book you read during this piece, during this, this interval, or, you're going to a supermarket. It could be anything. So it's part of my wannabe writer self-asking this question, but how did you determine what to put on the chopping block, or what to keep, or basically, or how'd you make those editing choices about about the topics, I guess?
I think chopping block, if I didn't, at a certain point, it was time. It was late. It was months late at a certain point. I think the deal with the deal I made with the people, the RISD Unbound fair was it was the second year of a virtual book fair, and the first year it was kind of I think I actually did pretty well selling stuff at the first RISD Unbound. Everybody was still doing everything digitally, and it was kind of a new thing. everybody was tired in 2021. I think I sold 3 books, and so like, and 2 of them to the RISD library, you know? So I think I wrote to the one person who bought it and was like, yo, I'm gonna keep working on this. Do you care? You know, I can give you your money back, or I can just send it to you when it's done. And they're like, oh yeah, keep working on it. And so it's like, it was like months and months late, because I was just gonna like take one more week to kind of polish it up in April. But I think when it just kind of like, whoosh, I was like, oh no, I'm gonna lean in. And so like in terms of like editing stuff, I took some I went through a breakup, and so in terms of like kind of taking stuff out that way, and I mean that's maybe like, I don't know. I think I was writing more about my own craziness and psychosis, and about my parents, which my poor parents, I think, like the attention. But like anybody else, you know, like I think that those were maybe more of the editing choices, like what made the most sense in terms of staying on good terms with everybody.
Mhm. And you know, I'm relatively new to Community Libraries of Providence. I've been here for a few years, but I had no idea that you know, Providence Comics Consortium kind of started at Providence Community Library through a workshop series. I thought that was really cool. And I don't know, could you, for those of us who aren't aware of that history, could you just, I don't know, share a little bit about that? Or
Oh, definitely. So I think co-started it with Andrew Esch, the first, and it was like it came out of Washington Park Library. I think that was like kind of the spearhead in terms of when the community libraries were relatively new as an institution, and just like having programming, having exciting programming, bang for your buck programming. And me and Andrew Esch were the original people who started it, and we were both kind of print freaks. And so the idea that we would make books with kids at the library, the kids would make assignments for adult cartoonists from all over the world. We would publish print books in print that would be check-outable through the libraries. So like all the kids taking home their copies and getting spaghetti on their copies, and like having like these copies that end up shredded and tattered. At least, I mean, it's crazy. It's crazy how short the life of a book actually is. But you know, at this point, there are kind of waterlogged, like some of the first book we ever did was like 100 pages, and then with Julia Gualtieri, I did a tour. We did a tour of libraries all over the state, and that was like a 240-page book. And so I know there are some libraries that have the Rhode Island tour anthology that are just like, you know, they're just like wet phone books at this point, you know. So it is just, and that's a big part of the debate, you know, in terms of Dylan Little, the old librarian from Washington Park, kind of put the ends of the spectrum of what a library is for. You know, is it to hold the Jedi scrolls, or is it to have books that are soiled with Cheetos fingers until they're no longer books? You know, and the answer is both. But you know, it is that I don't know. I've gotten off of the origin of the Comics Consortium, but yeah.
Yeah, so is that something that's still like the Providence Comics Consortium? What does that look like today?
Oh yeah, so just did some workshops at this summer. Did a Jamestown Art Center series earlier in the year. We're doing stuff in Pawtucket Public Schools. The horror the kids horror animation workshops are going to be Comics Consortium.
Neat. So folks can just reach out to you if they ever want to book something with you.
Yeah.
Cool. Sounds good. Well, thank you so much. Thank you so much for spending the time with us. And we've reached the end of the hour, but it's been a lot of fun. So thanks, Walker, for joining us. Thank you, everyone, for attending and being part of the conversation and hanging out with us. So just real quick, I do want to mention we have every month we have a special event or a book discussion or something cool that's happening online still. I put the link to the Linktree, Communities Read Linktree in the chat. It has the next few months of programs coming up. We have a virtual author talk, and actually it's another virtual author and illustrator talk coming up next month. It's a children's book with let's see, Lisa Robinson is the author, Lauren Simkin is the illustrator. It's called Not a Girl, the inspiring and true story of Dr. James Barry. In November, we'll go back to an author talk with someone who's local, actually, Annie Hartnett. I think she's local, and her book Unlikely Animals came out recently, so she'll be talking about that. So yeah, if you're interested, and in October we actually have two. We're also doing a book discussion. We're reading it's like a space horror book. The name is escaping me at the moment, but you can find it on the link. But in any case, yeah, if you're interested in attending any of those or any of them, just please register and join us in again. But yeah, so until next time, we'll see you then.
Thanks, Lee. Thanks, everybody. Appreciate it.
Cool. All right. Good night. Good night.
Bye.